We are back. We are back. Ligue 1 is back soon. And so we are back to talk about Ligue 1. Jérémy Magan, your host here to talk about Ligue 1 this season again. And Baptiste from Le Classique Pod, of course, accompanying me to preview Ligue 1 23-24. Baptiste, how are you?
I'm great. I'm looking forward to a season that sounds crazier than last year's and making predictions and expert analysis as prescient as I did last year. So
how times have changed in a year, though. When you think about it, last year we started the season with Paris Saint-Germain, with Messi, Mbappe, and Neymar, and with a World Cup that was going to happen in the middle of the season that was going to change it all. And then a year later, Saudi Arabia has come into the fold. We only have 18 clubs in Ligue 1. We are about to see half of our teams qualifying for European competitions next season. Football is working on its head these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Saudi Arabia. I feel like we've seen that kind of stuff before, but yeah, I mean it's utterly crazy, and seeing like the 7th place side and maybe in France, maybe going into Europe next year sounds insane. But more exposure for French clubs, great. I'm happy with that.
Let's see it that way. How did we leave Ligue 1 after 38 game last year? Paris, of course, was champion. Lens second, only a point behind PSG. Didn't feel like that with PSG champion 3 games before the deadline, but eventually, because PSG finished with a draw and a loss, Lens was able to come back a point behind them. Marseille third, who's going to play the Champions League, I don't know how you call that, 3rd round playoff or whatever it is, on Wednesday. It's Sunday night when we are recording right now. It's the 30th of July, Sunday morning in the UK for you, Baptiste. And so Marseille, halfway through the week when the videos are going to be released, will play against Panathinaikos to get to the Champions League. And then if we look all the way at the bottom, where we've lost Angers, we've lost Troyes, we've lost Ajaccio, and we've lost Auxerre to Ligue 2, we won 2 teams, Le Havre and Metz. But before we talk about the teams that went up, let's talk about the team that went down, and more so how we knew that those teams were going to go down. If we look at the video that we did a year ago, this is the moment where we have a bit of a pat on the back, Baptiste, and that's not going to last long. So take it. In our bottom 6 last year when we did the preview, we both had those 4 teams, Angers, Troyes, Ajaccio, and Auxerre at the bottom. I think that after that, we started getting things wrong, we'll say it politely. I'm going to start by happily punishing myself. I had Paris Saint-Germain up there, Monaco up there, Lyon up there, Marseille up there. Of course, in my mind, it was probably PSG 1, Marseille 2, Monaco 3, Lyon 4. Then I had Nice 5th, Strasbourg 6th, Rennes 7th, Lens 8th. Clearly, there's something that I had not analyzed the right way in there, whether it was, I don't know what's the worst, saying that Lens was going to be 8th and ended up being 2nd, although maybe it was a bit of a surprise, or Strasbourg seeing them qualifying for Europe and they ended up struggling to avoid relegation for the whole season. What was your nice prediction of last year, Baptiste? Was it Strasbourg as well?
So we can predict losers. We can't predict winners, I think, is the story. But yeah, I mean, I had Strasbourg, I think 6th as well. I think I had Lens 7th. And I can't recall. I think I might have had Monaco. I think I might have had Monaco 2nd, Rennes 3rd, Lyon 4th. And I think I had OM. I think I had OM 5th. I think I had OM 5th. I think that was my top 7. Was PSG, Monaco, Rennes, Lyon, Marseille, Strasbourg, and Lens. Which we got there in terms of the teams, just not the right order.
Just not in the right order. Well, Lens a little bit higher.
Strasbourg. Yeah, apart from Strasbourg.
Yeah, apart from Strasbourg.
Yeah.
And Strasbourg has now changed Galaxy, supposedly. So did Lyon. So did Lorient, but we're going to talk about that a bit more in detail. I guess maybe one last thing about last year. Not surprising to see Angers 3, Ajaccio, Auxerre going down eventually. Although we had to wait until the very, very, very end to see Auxerre going down and Nantes saving themselves. Nantes probably got away with one last season. It's going to be interesting to see how they go this year.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, absolutely no real surprise about some of these teams. I mean, Angers were doomed from the start. Ajaccio were just very limited. They just had very limited means. And Troyes was just chaotic.
Was okay until the Australian arrived.
Yeah, well, it was just chaotic, and there's no strategy. There was no strategy there from the City Group, so it was always going to be a struggle. For Auxerre, I think that was the team out of the four that we thought had the most chances of staying up, and I think they were a little bit unlucky towards the end. If the season had extended, it's very easy to say, but if the season had extended one or two more games, I think they would have stayed up. And but a good reaction from Nantes facing adversity. That last game, Ludovic Blas was immense. They were lifted by La Beaujoire, so it was also nice to see, a historic club with a great support, lifting itself up and out of relegation.
Yeah, second consecutive Coupe de France final for Nantes as well. This time they had lost to Toulouse, but they are still in Ligue, and so that's what matters. We're welcoming two pretty historical club back in Ligue 1 as well. FC Metz and Le Havre AC. Le Havre, who is the oldest professional club in France. For people who don't know, we were this close from getting Bordeaux back in Ligue 1, and then, as it's often the case in French football, chaos ensued. I'm sure anybody listening and interested in French football knows what happened in that last game when Bordeaux was hosting, I think it was Rodez.
Yeah.
And after the Rodez striker scored, he got pushed by a supporter and then fell on the floor and apparently was concussed, and the game was interrupted, which as a result meant Bordeaux couldn't win and go up in Ligue 1, and at the same time Rodez couldn't lose and be relegated in national, much to the dismay of Annecy, and that's an ongoing story. But the teams that we have, Metz and Le Havre, let's talk about them to start. Baptiste, I guess before we jump into 23-24, the season that we are going to cover, those two teams are historical landmarks in France, and being Le Classique. Baptiste, how good is it to see them back in Ligue 1?
It's great. It's great. Very recognizable clubs. You've mentioned Le Havre, le doyen du foot français, the oldest professional club. Metz, nearly champions with Robert Pires in the late 90s. Both teams with iconic kits. The checkered kit for Le Havre, the Grenats for Metz, and in areas that they've always had strong support there, particularly in Metz, I would say maybe more than Le Havre, but clubs that also have traditionally had a huge impact in terms of bringing through players through their academies. So it's good to see those teams being rewarded. I mean, Metz are a traditional yo-yo club over the last few years, and that's always been their struggle since the early 2000s to sort of stay up continuously over a number of years, whilst Le Havre, it's been a longer tenure outside the top flight. So I think a lot of people will be happy, and they've done it in slightly different ways, right? I mean, very progressive at Le Havre, if I can call it that. Young manager who's been given a second chance. Mathieu Bodmer, who's the darling of football Twitter in France, and because of his intelligence, he was a
sporting director.
Yeah, very, very smart player. A very good pundit when he became a pundit. Has been very impressive as a director of football. And whilst with Metz, it's more, don't change a winning formula to get you out of Ligue 2. And Laszlo Bologna, as the manager, 70 years old, he's proven. He's delivered for similar clubs over time, and the director of football, Pierre Dréossi, who's in his 60s and similarly has been in French football for a very long time. So quite interesting characters and personalities at the top of their club. But it's certainly good to see them come back and be relatively ambitious compared to their means, right? I think they're really going to try and have a go. They're not going with a massive inferiority complex into the season.
Interesting to see that of the three teams that went down 2 years ago, Saint-Etienne, Metz, and Bordeaux, Metz is the one who came back up straight away. I don't think it was the team that anybody really expected to be the one coming back up, coming out of that 21-22 season. Probably people wanted to see more Bordeaux or Saint-Etienne, the historic clubs that had gone down. Do the bounce back for Saint-Etienne, it was doomed from the get-go. Bordeaux really got close. But like you said, I think it's also sort of a credit to a club that maybe hasn't changed much in the way they run things, but it's just trying to run things the right way. And we're going to dip a little bit deeper on Metz right now and to see what they can bring to Ligue 1 this season. Like you said, they haven't changed much after coming out of Ligue 2, finishing second in Ligue 2. I was actually listening to Mathieu Oudol, the captain of Metz, overnight. He was live on a French radio show, and he was basically saying that they're just going to try and do a bit of the same, and that the team knows each other, and they're going to try and go for the momentum and hoping that would be enough to carry them. I don't know a lot of Ligue 2 team went up to Ligue 1 without getting a little bit of fresh blood and fared well. Do you?
No, I mean, but we also know of so many clubs who seem to have completely changed their attitude when they've come in and have been dramatically underwhelming, right? I mean, the one club I can maybe think of who's done that recently is Clermont, right? Clermont stayed close to their identity. They had no money, basically. That forced their hand slightly, but they had to be creative. They trusted their manager, they trusted their structure, and they've been 2 years consecutive in the top flight and finished 8th or 9th last year. So, I think I like, I respect clubs that are well run and that have ambition within their means. That sounds patronizing, but I don't mean it that way. And I think Metz, you look at what they've done. They trust the individuals at the club. I think they've built a new stand, or they've extended the stand at Saint-Symphorien. They've beaten their records of season ticket holders this year from 12,500 to 16,500. So there's a real enthusiasm behind the squad, and why couldn't it work? I mean, I think Ligue 1, certainly the bottom half is wide open. I would say from 8th or 9th onwards, it's wide open. So trust the people you have. If there's a system and it works, you just need that extra 5%, and those players might be able to be carried by the enthusiasm at the club.
I think as well, talking about the team who didn't change much and succeeded this season, Toulouse, somewhat kept what they were doing and kept their identity, even though now we'll talk about it. It's changed a bit. So it can work. I think the interesting thing as well with Metz is that season when they're in Ligue 1, when they go down, there's two players, Youssef Maziz and George Mikotadze, that they had loaned to their feeder club, Serein, in Belgium. And then when those two players came back to play with Metz in Ligue 2 last year, well, they were definitely the difference makers for Metz. So much so that George Mikotadze, he's said to be leaving Metz sooner rather than later, which would be a real blow for them, especially because, I don't know if it's sometimes purposely or a question of money, but Metz said that they didn't need to recruit, that they had enough good players to be able to do what they want to do. So I think if they do lose Mikotadze, who's from that new generation of Georgian players who's faring so well, they'll have to find somebody to make up for those, what was it last year, 23 goals and 8 assists in 37 games. I mean, that's quite a bit. It was probably the best player in Ligue 2 at some stage. So for them to stay in Ligue 1, you'd think at least they need to, if not keeping Mikotadze, which again seems like it's very unlikely now. Apparently even Marseille is trying to get him. But otherwise, at least finding a striker that can bring you some goals.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the big question mark for them is whether they'll keep hold of them. I think they've always planned to start the season without him. So if he stays, and he's not disgruntled, it's a bonus. I don't think they've put an unreasonable price tag on him. That doesn't sound like that's the case. I think it's just he's not anyone's really first option, I think, in terms of interested clubs, which makes for an interesting dynamic between the player and the club. But they've recruited, they've kept Maziz, as you've said. They've recruited Simon Elisor, who was banging goals in the third tier just over a year ago, then moved to Laval and was influential. And Laval represent, that's my club, in in keeping Les Tangos in Ligue 2. So, there's a natural, potentially natural progression here if he comes in full of confidence and he hits the ground running and given responsibilities. And we've seen that happen at Metz in the past, giving chances to players from lower leagues. Famously, Franck Ribéry was one of those. So, if they've got the structure in place and they trust it and they don't, lose their mind after a potentially difficult start, then I think they'll be in there with the potential to survive. They're still obviously, objectively maybe a little bit of quality short, but again, for me, it's a lot about positive dynamics and enthusiasm at the club. And I think if they don't start too badly, then they might, they'll have a real good chance.
Yeah, the only real recruit you mentioned, Elisor, the other one, Maxime Collin, who's at right back, 31 years old, quite experimented, over 250 games in championship, which is, I guess, as good as any preparation for Ligue 1 when we talk about physicality and what needs to be brought when you come to Ligue 1. You talked as well about the start of the season, if they have a good start. Well, they were not given a good calendar. To start with, the first game, Metz is playing against Rennes. Then they're going they're going to Rennes, then they're hosting Marseille. Then it's Clermont, Reims, and Lens. So definitely a nice little welcome to Ligue 1 for les Messins. And with Laszlo Bologna and Pierre Dréossi, some faces that we're looking forward to seeing back in Ligue 1. Let's go to le doyen of La Ligue 1. Le Havre, who I think is going to have a bit of a Toulouse-style story this season with Mathieu Bodmer and with how strong they were for the first half of the season last year. I think they conceded like a goal in 18 games. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but they had a very strong defense with Lloris's brother, Gauthier Lloris in defense, not as a goalkeeper, but with Arthus Desmas and Sangaré defensively as well. And now they're back in Ligue 1, and you said it, Mathieu Bodmer, everybody talks about him on Twitter because he's not only a very smart former player and apparently a very smart sporting director, but also a very good communicator. And so he's making sure that everybody is looking at his team like he's doing something that nobody has ever done before. Coming back to Ligue 1, though, after having spent so many years in Ligue 2, is not going to be easy for Le Havre.
No, and I think, again, it's the same thing as Metz. If the positive dynamic, in my mind, continues very early on, and they've got a big group of players, then you could see them. You could see them surviving. I see them more as a like of Auxerre of last year than Toulouse. They've kept a pretty similar group, and they'll be there or thereabouts. And my concern for them is they do not have a lot of experience of the highest level. I think even Metz, a certain number of their players, mentioned Ukija, Udol, those guys have played in Ligue 1. They don't necessarily have happy memories of playing in Ligue 1, but they've played there, so they'll understand that it's a step up. For Le Havre, it's a young team. They haven't invested massively. They haven't brought in a huge number of experienced players. Although I'll be interested in seeing how Daler Kouziaev does, because he's an experienced head, albeit coming all the way from Russia. But 47 caps for Russia is nothing to sneer at. But I'm also a bit concerned about them losing Victor Lecal in midfield. I think he was very important for them, and he went to the sunny uplands of the Middle East. So, I'm looking at them in the same way as Metz, just with a little bit better PR. Is maybe an unfair thing to say, but it feels a bit fresher. It feels a bit flashier than Metz, but I think it's the same. It's the same principle, although based a bit more on analytics and the Toulouse approach than Metz.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's more that that the analytic that they try to push the players that they have experience in Ligue 1. There's Walid El Hadjam who was with Troyes 2 seasons ago, and now there's Johan Salmier who was with Troyes last season, and we've seen how Troyes ended up. So it's not maybe the best one. I want to touch on Kuzayev though, that you just quickly mentioned. Nothing to sneer at the international cap, but also he was with what everybody considers the best team in Russia for a number of years, Zenit St. Petersburg for the past 6 or 7 years, and with not too shabby a return, 5 goals, 6 assists last year, and generally there or thereabouts. Mathieu Bodmer, in his communication, said that it was a real coup to bring Daler Kuzayev to I was going to say to Europe, to Western Europe, and to France, and that's what motivated him, trying to find a way to play in Europe and trying to find a club where he was for sure being considered as a starter. So it'll be interesting to see. It's not often that you see a 30-year-old making that move from Russia to Le Havre, and we don't know everything about the club of Le Havre, but I would think that they probably would pay Kuzayev a little bit less than what he was paid by Gazprom-owned St. Petersburg. So I think he'll be one of the attractions of the season, good or bad, because bringing a player of his quality, of his experience. Again, we talk about the Russian Cups, but it's also Champions League football, Europa League football, lots of European campaigns that is done with Zenit St. Petersburg. So almost on paper too good for Le Havre. So that's good that they were able to attract him.
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely a coup on, like you said, on paper it looks great. Obviously, he'll need to adapt very quickly. It'll be interesting to see how much responsibility they place on him, because it's not an easy move to make, to move from Russia to a team battling against relegation in Ligue. You've different expectations, different language. So he'll definitely be an attraction, and you can understand why they went for such a player. I think they needed that kind of player. But it's going to be, it's going to be an uphill climb. They would be objectively one of the favorites for relegation now. I think we can be maybe more optimistic for them in Metz than the previous teams that have been promoted, because there's a real structure at those clubs. There's a real sense of realism as well, which I think is good. But it's going to be a battle.
I'm curious, where do you see those two newly promoted teams finishing at the end of the season 23-24, Baptiste?
So I think they're in my bottom 3. Now, is there a world in which that's very realistic, in which they both survive either by the skin of their teeth or even relatively comfortably? Yes. Like, I'm not... I don't think they're a dead certainty to go down. I just had to pick 3 teams that have to go down, and they're in the bottom 3. I think they're quite interchangeable in 16th and 17th. I would have maybe Le Havre just above. So at the moment, I've got Le Havre 16th and Metz 17th. But as I said, I could see them. I could see them doing relatively well and surviving. So it's not like an Ajaccio or Angers of last year where I was like, these guys have no chance. Those guys have a chance. It's just at the moment, based on the teams they have, I think that's where they'll end up finishing. What about you?
Well, we're going to become the sit on the fence football podcast at the end of this those predictions. I have Metz getting the wooden spoon, and finishing nicely last of Ligue for a number of reasons. One of them being the fact that those are players who've already been traumatized by going down and were not able to really answer when it was about to happen to them, and I don't see why it would change now. And also because if they don't have Mikotadze, they have to like rebuild around another forward, and I think it's going to be a pretty harsh task. But I'd love to be proven wrong. But I've been convinced by the PR of Mathieu Bodmer. Therefore, I see Le Havre saving themselves and staying in Ligue 1 another season and finishing in the 15th spot is where they have them. Plus, there's a striker who's called Antoine Joujou, and so if Gift Orban joins the league, I just can't wait to see Gift and Joujou playing against each other in Ligue 1, so that we can have the best time in the world when it comes to lovely, funny dad jokes and punditry when we follow our Ligue 1. All right, that's the two teams that are coming up from Ligue 2. Let's look at the teams that finished, I guess, the worst in Ligue 1 without being relegated. We're going to start by the team that inspired your shirt today, Baptiste. Lovely yellow and green shirt that you're wearing. Nantes, les Canaries, struggled to remain in Ligue 1, did it eventually, lost a real talent in Ludovic Blas at the off-season, lost another talent. I don't know if he was a real talent because he was definitely on the decline, Andy Delors, to a Qatari squad as well, and decided not to get a new coach and to stick with the name all of a sudden.
Pierre Aristouille.
Pierre Aristouille. There you go. I knew it was a name that it's usually hard to forget. To keep Pierre Aristouille. I guess the bad news is Albert Lafont is Ludovic Blas is out. The good news is Alban Lafont is still here, the captain. The other bad news that I think just was released yesterday or the day before is André Girotto. Apparently, he's going to Saudi Arabia as well, which will be a blow for them. But other than that, they've sort of kept the team the way they had it. And there is some talent. Ignatius Ganago, Moses Simon, which have been on and off, but then Quentin Merlin, Pedro Chirivella, who've been maybe a little bit better, and some up-and-coming player. I'm thinking about maybe Jawena Jam, Florent Mollet, who had a solid second part of the season. Is not up-and-coming, but at least he brings the experience. So what do you think? Another complicated season for Nantes?
Yes. Just a lot of red flags for Nantes. I have a real soft spot for Nantes. I think I probably similar to you. I grew up with les Canaries on top of Ligue 1, playing le jeu à la Nantaise. Some incredible teams there, playing a very distinct style of football. Struggling to see them doing better than last season, and therefore, by definition, it's not looking great. Obviously, question marks over the manager. I mean, Pierre Aristouille, he took them to safety, had a limited number of games to do it, did his job then. I wish him all the best, but obviously untested. We never know how it's going to go. There's been very, very little investment, and they really, really relied on Ludovic Blas. And now if Girotto's leaving, I mean, those are two pillars of the team heading out. And if you combine that with Lafont's form towards the end of the season, which became a bit questionable, the stagnation of certain players. I mean, I like Chirivella. I think he's maybe hit his ceiling. He's a very serviceable and competent midfielder in Liga that I think a lot of clubs would like. But he can't carry that midfield on his own. I think defensively, if they lose Girotto, I don't have a lot of faith in that defense. So I'm not quite sure where the goals are going to come from, because if you take out Ludovic Blas, then you only have Mustafa Mohamed up top. There's not, and I'm not just saying that because he's Egyptian, but very Mido-esque type of player. So little moments of magic, but over 90 minutes, he's not necessarily going to be there most of the time. So they're light up front, lost creativity in midfield, and potentially losing a pillar of defense. That doesn't bode well for a side that really, really struggled over the second half of last season. Now they don't have Europe this year. Maybe that will stabilize them. but I really struggle to see them doing well this year, and I've actually got them bottom in my predictions, which is harsh. And I hope for something other than that for a historic club, but I think they'll be there.
Do we though? Do we hope for something different? Every year we say that Nantes needs to finally crash and burn so they can restart from the beginning and rebuild from their ashes and re-become the club that we know they are. It looked like they were almost about to have a serious change with Camboire at the helm and with players brought for Camboire to do what he could do, and then they didn't do. And now Pierre Aristouille, who seems, is probably a great coach. I don't know him personally, but it feels like he was put there and he saved them, and he seems like he's just going to say yes to have his first team experience, because why not? So he's just going to be there and not ask for any players really, and not ask for any reinforcement if Ludovic Blas goes. And now, I'm looking at their starting lineup when they played Hull City earlier today in a friendly, and it's Lafont, Diaz, Castelletto, Palois, Hajam, Chirivella, Mutusami, Coco, Merlin, and then Mole and Mohamed up front, and then Galago came in, and Moda Salmon came in, and Kader Bamba came in, and Sissoko came in as well. It's just it feels that Ligue 1 has had enough of that a little bit. Lafont was the one that seemed to have no ceiling, and like you said, didn't have a great end of the season. I have them 16. I have them at the bottom as well, trying to go to another playoff at La Beaujoire to try and stay in Ligue 1. I think that's where we might see them, unless something big changes, that which could be Pierre Aristouille.
Well, I'm hoping that for him. Obviously, I wish him the best. I think compared to the other two teams we've talked about in Metz and Le Havre, and compared to some of the other potential relegation contenders, there's inherent chaos at Nantes. That's always around the corner. We're just one crisis away from another crisis, basically, at Nantes. And so, there's tension between the fans and the owner that's been lasting ever since he's taken over, and he took over a while ago. I mean, he must be coming about to 15 years now at the head of the club. Camboire was a good conduit between the two factions and had legitimacy both with Kita and with the fans, and I think he took on that burden. It's a lot of pressure to weigh on Aristouille, who also, I think, came through the rank, is also a sort of Nantais souche, if I can call it that. But on top of that, you have not just Valdemar Kita that you have to deal with. You have Franck Kita, who takes all the sporting decisions, right? And there's dodgy transfers going on. That club, if they don't start well, or if they have a difficult time, is just going to go into chaos, and is going to go into people pulling in different directions and not working together. And that's why, for me, you combine that atmosphere, that negative dynamic, and the lack of investment and talent in the squad, and that's just, they've got a recipe for me to finish bottom. And I would just say I see a lot of similarities with Angers of last year. For me, Angers, when they started the season, we knew they were dead. They're not quite there. They're not quite there yet, sorry. But it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to see a season unfolding that way. And that's my real fear. That's my real fear for them, and that's why I've got them bottom.
Without Blas, it's hard to see where the magic could come from for Nantes. Unfortunately, well, we both have them not too high. That might change for the next team that we are going to talk about. The new Blues, from the northeast of France, Strasbourg, now property of Ted Boehly and Bluco, who also own Chelsea FC, of course. Interesting to see a club like Strasbourg in that galaxy of Chelsea. We said it to start the pod. Times change, and after all the stories of Nice's owner Ineos, Jim Ratcliffe, trying to buy Manchester United and ergo making Nice a feeder club for Manchester United, well, it happened differently. Troyes became the feeder club per se of Manchester City, but as you said, it felt like he was made without a plan. But for Strasbourg, it seems a little bit more thought through. And somehow the first couple of decisions that have been made seem to make sense. Mark Keller is still at the head. Apparently, he's still going to have a word to say, and it's still very much his club, but they have the fund of Chelsea, and then, to start with, and probably for Ted Boehly to make sure that his new toy has the recognition necessary. Well, they pick a coach that has already experience in Ligue 1, that is a world champion as well as a player. Patrick Vieira, back in Ligue 1, at the head of Strasbourg. What's your general feeling about Strasbourg being in the Chelsea galaxy, Baptiste? We know how well Chelsea did last year.
I mean, chaos. Why would you want to be affiliated with Todd Boehly, or however you name him?
Maybe you get Enzo Fernandez on loan. That's the only reason.
Yeah, I mean, good. Obviously, I'm not a fan of this multi-ownership model that seems to go on everywhere. It hasn't worked for Troyes. It's half working for Lorient, I suppose.
It's only the beginning.
We'll see what happens. We can only judge it on the decisions they've made so far, and so far the decisions have been good and make me relatively optimistic for the season ahead. Patrick Vieira is still a youngish manager. He's still learning. He tends to have a good first season, and he tends to want his teams to play in a particular way, which is at least be possession based and patient and try to control the game. So you've got to appreciate that. He's also a smart man that was probably I'm hoping learning from his previous experiences. So I'm not too shocked about the appointment. Does Patrick Vieira as a manager make me dream? Not necessarily, but is he a potentially stable hand for a club, having had the experience of managing within the City group? That's potentially an advantage. And in terms of their ins and outs at the club, I mean, obviously we've lost Dimitri Liénard, which is a bit of a sad story. If you know the story of Dimitri Liénard, you can't do anything but warm to him and to his personality and to his impact at the club. But they've kept Gamero. Their summer transfers have been, pretty interesting. I think, they've obviously targeted youth at both ends of the pitch. Emmanuel Emega, 20-year-old striker from Sturm Graz. You've got Abakar Silla, 20 million from Club Rouge, also 20 years old. Rumors of them doing a double bid for Dylan Bakwa and Junior Mwanga of Bordeaux, I think is quite interesting. Jesse Deminguet on a free contract from Caen, I think is an intriguing potential under the radar signing that will work. And they've kept hold of, pillars apart from Djikou, pillars of their side. Matt Sales is still at the club. Jean-Riner Bellegarde, I think, is still at the club. So I think there's positivity there. It doesn't strike me as wholesale changes that don't make any sense, like we saw at Troyes. And I think with Marc Keller still being at the club, hopefully that provides some stability. So I'm relatively high on them, keeping in mind that, as I've said, from about 8th to 18th, I could see any team ending up there. But I've got them in 8th at the moment. Now, I got seriously burnt last year with Strasbourg. And I thought they would finish 6th with Julien Stéphan. Obviously, veered in the other direction, but I think they're closer to 10th than to 18th. So I could see them finish anywhere between 8th and 12th, but I've got them 8th at the moment.
Nice positivity. Correct me if I'm wrong as well. One thing that's different about Chelsea acquiring Strasbourg versus Manchester City, acquiring Troyes is, and I'm trying to say that while, not disrespecting Troyes whatsoever, but Troyes was a club rebuilding itself, trying to find an identity, build something. Strasbourg is a club that is very well settled in French history and resettled under Marc Keller since they went down to regional and then went back up. So there's an identity there. There's, a lot of things that Strasbourg is known for. On top of my head, that tribune, that stand, I should say, that is only for family and women, which is apparently the safest tribune in all of France. Of course, Lameno, who's been known to be a fortress. I think it was under the COVID year that they would lose to no one, resisted twice to Paris Saint-Germain, and the number of players that had made it history. When you're a club like Chelsea, who feels like the antithesis of a club with history, and again, it's being unfair to Chelsea because there's history in Chelsea. It just feels weird since it was bought first by Abramovich and then sold under the circumstances that we know, to somebody who decided to just go and play Football Manager when he got the club back. It's really, thank God that Mark Keller stays to try and make sure that Strasbourg remains a football club with the entity that they have, because the identity is there and matter, and is the reason why I think we see so many players faring well at Strasbourg, because there's that identity, that culture, that fortress that Lameno is supposed to be, the fans that are really, le 12e homme, the 12th man, is very, very true when it comes to Lameno. So you got to hope that it's going to be done smartly, although, not being naive, Strasbourg will be the place where young player will sign before they go to Chelsea, or being loaned from Chelsea, undoubtedly.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so far, like I said, so far we can only judge with what's happened. They've also held on to a good number of players, including their young players. Strasbourg over the last few years have developed a good number of youngsters. Obviously, Mohamed Simakan moved to Leipzig, right? For last season. There are two players that they've kept that I'm really excited about, in a Habib Diarra in midfield, who finished the season on a high, right, and was really instrumental in keeping them up. And the one that I'm even more impressed by is Ismail Doucouré at the back. Can play right back, center back, played holding midfielder towards the end of last season, and is a real Simakan-like type of talent, I think. So, if the Chelsea ownership at the moment with Marc Keller means that they get to keep their young players, add to them with even more young talent, whilst maintaining some reasonable structure around with the likes of experienced players like Sels and Gamero, for me, that's a pretty good recipe and something to be excited about for the season ahead, at least. But where do you have them? Where do you have them finishing?
I have them higher than I should. I did my predictions, and I was like, what can they do? So I put them 10th, bang on in the middle. Not anymore. It's 9 now, the middle. But anyway, but the more we talk about it, and the more I'm going to say that a couple of times on this pod, I'm convinced by the team more than I'm convinced by the manager. And so that means it can go anywhere. I like the players. I like the making of that squad. You mentioned Doucouré, and you mentioned the other young player that you just mentioned, Diarra, excuse me. I like that they were able to keep Bellegarde, that they were able to keep Niamzi defensively, that they are trying to count on Moïse, who did very well with Annecy last year, and almost helped them staying in Ligue 2 with everything that we know happened. It's not over yet for them. I like that they're doing it, and that they make the right choice as far as recruiting. I mean, it might feel like it's a lot, 20 million for Silla and 30 million for Emega, but Emega last year managed to score nine goals and did 3 assists. I like that they went and get Jesse Demenge. To me, he's a player who actually can make a real difference. Those players who've tasted Ligue 1 for a little bit, and then basically were sent back to Ligue 2, and maybe will come back with that real envy to make a difference. We're talking about a player who maybe last year wasn't as good as they were in the past couple of years, but 21, 22 and 2021 almost brought them back to Ligue 1. 6 goals, 9 assists, 21, 22, 4 goals, 5 assists, 2021, can take set pieces, can bring the ball in every situation, and really maybe what Strasbourg was missing in recent years. We had the intensity and the percussion, and then Thomasson had that, and then the first 6 months of last year a little bit less, went back to Lens and found himself back, but that created a real gap in Strasbourg. And with Jesse Demengue, I think they found a good playmaker who's only 25 years old. So yeah, I like what I'm seeing with Strasbourg, except the coach. I'm not a big fan of Patrick Vieira, and I think it really felt like such a, we have an American owner, which coach can we put there that will flatter all markets, that will tick all the boxes? And of course, it needs to tick all the boxes, and it needed to be something like this rather than, even a Julien Stéphan or God forbid, keeping Frédéric Antonetti at the helm, which apparently he said that he didn't want to do it either. But it felt like there was other choices. I can't really give you one or two right now, but that would have been better, at least for what feels like the plan is. If the plan is developing youngster to make them then sign for Chelsea and to make them shine, put me a coach who wants to make his team play football. Even if it's a Jean-Marc Furlan who's happily in Caen now, or a coach like this that wants to make your team play and then give him the good players and enough experience to stay there. Anyway, that's what I think of Patrick Vieira, and I'd love to stand corrected. But that said, see, with all I'm saying about him, I still have put Strasbourg finishing 10th. So somehow I believe in what might happen this year. I'm wondering how many players sign for Chelsea and get dumped to Strasbourg on the 31st of August. That's
oh God,
that's what I'm looking forward to see.
No, hopefully
Malo
not
Gusto.
that. No comment on that.
What is Malo Gusto doing in Chelsea? Malo Gusto, what's his name? The Ukrainian player who came from
Mudryk. Yeah.
Who knows, If it's not Enzo Fernandez, Chelsea was not going to be happy. I was listening to, last thing on Strasbourg, Marc Keller, when he gave the interview to explain what happened. He said basically that I think it's Mangan who works with him in the group professional, and then it's going to get back to me, but there's a chief scout anyway. He was saying that basically the decision remains their decision, but they've scouted, number of players in Europe in the past few years, and there are players in the youth system of Chelsea that they are interested in. It's about convincing them to come and play in Strasbourg. They don't want it to be Chelsea say, I pay you, you go and play for my feeder club. They want it to be the player has a real interest in coming to play in Ligue, and he's okay to leave the rainy London to join the cold Alsace and Strasbourg. So at least you're not living like the sunny beaches of Barcelona to find yourself in the cold of Alsace. But it made sense, at least when he said that, and it felt a bit encouraging for Strasbourg. I mean, if this works, actually, that's going to be my last question on Strasbourg for you. I just thought about that. If this works, if Strasbourg develops good player, if a player like Habib Diallo finds, find something in England, if Habib Diallo ends up going to Chelsea, or if he ends up being a something positive for Strasbourg eventually, do you think teams like Manchester United, Arsenal would consider, getting themselves a little Frenchie to fit their gigantic EPL club?
I hope not, but why not? I mean, if you look at Strasbourg, what's not to like about that club? For example, you've obviously got to find the right one, but Strasbourg, in my mind, is a good choice. It's got a great, unbelievable support base. It's iconic even in France. It's now a stable Ligue 1 club. I know last year was a bit more difficult, but it's been a stable Ligue 1 club for a number of years. And it's a good, and Ligue 1 is a good window. It's a good shop window, either to go back to your club and say, well, I've delivered in a league that's widely recognized as one of top 5, top 6, or a good shop window to go to another club. So I think Ligue 1 clubs are not all Ligue 1 clubs, but a good number of them would be a good proposition. I'd be more worried for clubs like Bordeaux and Saint-Etienne that this might happen to, because and same as Strasbourg, they've got their real identity, but I think let's see how it goes. Clearly, the Troyes example has been horrendous. I think fans have felt completely disconnected from the club, and that's the worst thing that can happen.
Worked for Toulouse though, Redbird capital, Milan, AC Milan, and Toulouse.
Yeah, but they
we often
haven't.
forget that.
Yeah, but
because it's made the right way, because it feels like
yes,
it's two different clubs.
But I think they are generally two different clubs. I think they haven't. They're obviously owned by the same owners, and I'd always be wary of private equity. But they have treated them like completely separate assets. Whilst the Galaxy, what we saw with Troyes was you end up with the deadwood of Man City that nobody wants, and that's how you end up with, what was the name, Eric Palmer-Brown as your centre back, Palaversa on loan, those guys, and that just kills your club.
It's weird because they didn't do that with their other club, Manchester City. We, last thing on Bordeaux, and say that could happen to them. What did I read? What's his name? Gerard Lopez apparently was interested into helping Sochaux staying in Ligue 2 by getting involved into their capital. Sometimes you think people have dug enough and then they just keep digging.
Yeah, no, I mean, the fit and proper test, right? Whatever it is, whether in France and the UK, is unbelievable. I mean, his operations are so opaque; no one knows where his money's come from. He's put his clubs in very difficult position every time. They're obviously incredible success at Lille, but financially, really put them in a difficult position. He's done the same with Bordeaux. He shouldn't really be anywhere near a club, in my opinion, but still finds his way.
Some of them still find a way. Next team that we're looking at, I think we are both pretty. We both predict a pretty grim future for those ones. Stade Brestois, les Pirates of the northwest of France. They were there or thereabout all season last year. Always fighting to try and stay. There was some success story at Brest last year. Be Les Melou or Le Doiron up front, or Belkebla, who is now actually without a contract, and who knows where he's going to end up. Franco Nora did well, and so well that he was sold for 9 million euros to Borussia Mönchengladbach. But I don't mind the recruitment. Jonas Martin, smart move in the middle, and then they got Satriano back, this young Uruguayan striker from Inter Milan, who had come and played 6 months and scored 5 goals a year and a half ago. That said, that's it for Stade Brestois. And I like
Bradley Loco.
I like, what's his name, Marco Bizzo, the keeper. But what are they doing this year? Can they become another Clermont and somehow be better the second time around than they were the first time around, or is that another team that maybe have run its course in Ligue 1?
I think it's a team that just wants to stabilize, right? I think they had Dall'Olio, right, as their manager, that they then swapped with Derzakarian. Now they've had Eric Roy since last year. I think they'd be looking to have, and to be fair, they did that with both Dall'Olio and Derzakarian. They've backed their manager to the best that they can, have signed players that fit that manager's team identity, right? So I think they're just trying to go about it the same way, knowing that for them, anything above 16th is a success, right? I mean, they're not necessarily a historical Ligue 1 club, and they don't have the most assets or means at their disposal. So they're working within their means. Is it the most imaginative? Not necessarily. Is it the most exciting? Not necessarily either. But they've got a solid squad, and they're hoping that experience pulls them through. And you could argue that if it comes down to the wire, between, let's say, Brest and Le Havre for 16, that experience might come in and kick in and play an important role. I think that's what they're banking on. So, all in all, a sensible summer window, a sensible club. It's that we kind of leave them on the wayside because they're not the most recognizable brand, if I can put it that way. So they're a bit of an afterthought, but that probably works for them. So I see them struggling again. I see them finishing in around the same spot as last year. I've got them just escaping relegation. I've got them 15th. Sorry, but I see more of a chance of them getting dragged into a relegation battle than escaping the middle half of the table.
I got them 17. And as we talk about them, I'm like, oh, but you know what? They can actually make it. But no, I get them down. But that said, I look at the midfield and it's Pierre Lesmelou, Jonas Martin, Mathias Pereira Lage, Romain Del Castillo. How can this very Ligue 1 midfield ever crumble for that many games? They lose every game against, I was going to say Paris Saint-Germain, Marseille. They probably will win at the Velodrome. But they lose every game against the big teams, and they'll probably win against teams that are less experienced than them. So it's about, hopefully, for them getting the right balance there. I think what's always the issue with Brest is clearly offensively. And when you lose Franco Nora, who was basically doing it all for them offensively, and when you lose Belkebla, who was this 6'8" that was actually bringing quite a bit. As much as I'm actually a fan of Jonas Martin, even if he's getting of age, but because he's that player kind of like Jérôme Leroy back in the days, who had the smart beyond his years that maybe people tend to not see. I think it's going to be complicated for them to do it, but there's a lot of players that I like in that team, so hopefully the Parrot gets the treasure.
And look, I think from an attacking standpoint, Jérémy Ledouaron is somebody that teams should take a look at. He had a very impressive season last year, 10 goals, 3 assists in 32 games. For a team like Brest is nothing to laugh at. That's a real good performance from somebody who discovered top flight only 2 years ago. And Steve Mounier is a battering ram who will get his fair share of goals, right? If he plays a full season, he'll be around 10 goals a season. So I think we know what their playbook is. Their playbook is play the ball down the wings, try and get it into the box, have wingers that score and fullbacks that put the ball into the box for the likes of Mounier, Douaron, who are amazing in the air. Will that be enough to beat the size just around them? Probably, but maybe not, I think is the way I would look at it.
Let's see how they manage. I think they've lost a little bit of that wingers activity actually. So we'll see how they can make up for it. Le Stade Brestois. Let's go to the next club. Another club, we were just talking about them when we talked about multiple propriety. I'm surprised that they finished so low last year because I think they were one of those teams that maybe the PR made us feel like they're probably better than what they ended up being. Toulouse, who finished 13th last year. We're still in the teams that finished with a negative goal difference in the end. So Toulouse, one of them, and Toulouse, who looks like they've lost everything this summer. All the players that mattered: Branko van den Boomen, Stijn Spierings, Brik de Jaguere, Bibiche, Maxime Dupé, Raphaël Ratao recently, of course, Philippe Montagnier left as well. It looked like a lot and more coming in. Maybe Abuklol, maybe Shaibi, maybe Dessler. It's a team that felt like they were getting somewhere, and it's a lot of players that were so important last year that are leaving. They were so important to their promotion to Ligue 1 that are leaving. Of course, we've been sold for the past couple of years how Toulouse is amazing by recruiting players without ever seeing them play and by just looking at their software and their stats. And of course, it's worked. So we're going to keep looking at it. But it feels like a season that could be complicated for Le Stade Toulousain with all this experience gone.
Yeah, real question marks. I mean, the Brentford of Ligue 1, it keeps going about things the same way, right? I mean, in my mind, their midfield three that you've mentioned, Spearings, Van den Boomen, De Jager, was one of the best midfield partnerships in Ligue last year. It had a bit of everything. And I'm a huge fan of Stein Spearings. I think I found him more impressive than the likes of Van den Boomen in a way last year. He controlled in a team that lacked control. He was kind of the one trying to get some over the midfield. And obviously the Philippe Montagnier sacking was interesting because I thought I'd understood he had a good relationship with Comoli. He was buying into the vision of the club. All of a sudden, he's being let go. Carles Martinez Nove is a bit of an unknown entity. It's so genuine, legitimate question marks, and the hope will be that they're not all of a sudden moving too fast, right? Because obviously they've only had one season back in the top flight, which went well. They've got Europe coming in. This is, I think for me that's the real question: is are they burning through stages a bit too rapidly? But there's still, what I also like is they are counting on internal improvement at the club, right? Anthony Rouault is still there. Nicolaisen, you've mentioned Abu Klal, Shaibi, Thijs de Linga, who is very, very impressive towards the end of the last season. There's real talent there. But it's a little bit of unexpected chaos at the club. Not chaos, but unexpected instability all of a sudden. Means that there are legitimate question marks. I still think they'll be safe, but they've lost a core part. I mean, they've lost their whole midfield, right? So that, I mean, you need to get on the front foot very quickly for people not to look at that.
Carles Martinez Novel was the assistant manager of Philippe Montagnier last year, and when you look at his career, it's always interesting. He's only a year older than me. Espanyol Barcelona youth goalkeeping coach in 2010, and then fitness coach of Espanyol Barcelona youth, then the manager of Espanyol youth. Then he went to Barcelona, the real Barcelona club. For 3 years, he was the manager in the youth, and then the manager of the under 16. Then he went to Al Rayyan, and then he was the youth coach of Kuwait before coming back to Toulouse and being assistant manager here. It feels almost undreamt of for him to be able to get a first team coach appointment with his career behind him. But yeah, who knows what that's going to bring to them as far as the recruits. You call them the Brentford of Ligue 1, rightfully so. They got Alex Dominguez to replace Maxime Dupé, keeper from Las Palmas in second division of Spain. Of course, they had Chetilog, who had joined last year to be the number 2 of Dupé, and he probably thought he was going to be the number 1. And now we're seeing a Spanish goalkeeper coming into his legs. And then they've recruited Franck Magri. I don't mind that from Bastia, but again, that probably isn't the place where they needed to recruit somebody. They recruited Yanis Begraoui, who's I think coming back from Pau. Rather, I think they had recruited maybe last year. But otherwise, players that we don't know: César Gelabert, Ibrahim Sissoko, who was at NEC Nijmegen in the Netherlands, and Christian Caceres Jr., who was at Red Bull New York, following this much of the MLS. Is not the player who's impressed the most, and New York Red Bull is a team that has struggled in the past year or so. So a lot of question marks. It kind of feels like the subs of last year in the midfield will be the starter this year. I'm thinking about Vincent Sierro, who had done a fair share of game in the second part of the season. Denis Genreau, who hopefully for him has developed a lot over the summer because he felt a little bit light last year, even for Ligue 1. Even in Ligue 2, he felt a bit light. And then Mamadi Bangré is back as well. He had a bit of time in QRM in Ligue 2. So it'd be interesting to see how they fare with all this. But yeah, huge question mark on the TFC. Where do you have them finishing?
Yeah, I've struggled with that one. I think the teams behind them, I have a little bit less faith in them, which might explain how I got there. But I've got them ninth. I mean, Europe might. Yeah, I know. Even as I say it, I'm like, what are you doing? I've got them ninth. I think they do have some continuity in their squad. I despite all that we've said, there's still the likes of Dissler, Nicolaisen, if he's not sacked for having bet on too many things and taking loans from his colleagues and not repaying them. Rouault, was it what's his name? Swatzo at left back, who was
Soiseau?
impressive. They've got their front three. If they bank on improvements like the Jean then you could I see more reasons for it to not to work, despite the red flags that I have flagged, and that, and you have to give credit to them that over the last 2 years their scouting and their decision making has worked. So for those reasons, and for the fact that I don't necessarily see them lasting in Europe, as long as Nantes did, for example, last year. For those reasons, I've got them ninth. But
I've got them 8th.
But they could finish 14th, and then I look like a fool again. So chances are very high. Yeah.
I've put them 8th. It's like we've made our plan on the side before we started the pod, and we've like hyped ourselves on some of the teams, and then we talk about it, and we're like, yeah, no, Strasbourg not going to be great. 9 or 10. Toulouse, yeah, I think it's going to be really hard. 8 or 9.
Yeah.
What's going to happen for the teams that we do believe in? Everybody is going to be champion this season. And I think, to be fair, it's a good depiction of what's going to happen in Ligue this year. I think we just know that we don't know, and it's going to be the fact that it's going to be 18 clubs, the fact that so many teams have surprised us in the past few years, make it. We're going to ask ourselves a few questions when we see this season developing, and Toulouse is definitely one of those teams that we just kind of know that they can surprise us. So clearly, both you and me have banked on them surprising us.
Yes.
Putting them on the first half of the table.
Yeah, they'll keep surprising us. We hope, in a positive way.
We hope. Otherwise, next year we're going to have to talk about how we put Toulouse in the first half of the table, and one spot away from European qualification. And then interesting that they will play in Europa League this year, of course, having won the Coupe de France. So that could be something that you would think would have brought more players to their doors, but I guess maybe they were not interested and they were happy with the squad that they have. That's the bottom six. That's a third of the league already. Look at us with only our 18 clubs.